Director Glenn,
Present in the city of Kalamazoo.
Director Beach,
Present in the city of Kalamazoo.
Director Harrington rather, excuse me. Director Marissa. She's here. Director Brown,
Present and currently in the city of Reno,
oh my.
but just temporarily in Reno, Nevada, but I am here.
Director Williams,
I forgot it again. Hello. I'm just chatting away without my microphone on. Hello, everybody.
here from the City of Kalamazoo.
I apologize. I am in Kalamazoo County, not in the city tonight.
And the Director Dela Cruz.
Present in the city of Kalamazoo.
Okay.
So do we wait for Director Harrington?
I think we can continue because you still have a quorum, right?
Yep. I'd like to ask for a motion to excuse the absence of Chair Houston.
So moved, Dr. Angela Graham Williams.
Second by Janine Brown.
Thank you.
And I need to make our caption statement. So welcome to the February 3rd, 2021 Civil Rights Board meeting. Just a reminder that for public comment, please call 269-226-6573 and leave a voicemail message limited to 3 minutes. During citizens' comments, your voicemail message will be played back for the good of the order. Thank you. I also want to say that closed caption is now available via the City of Kalamazoo Facebook live stream and will also be available on the YouTube replay. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bonner. Now I'd like to ask if there are any changes to our agenda.
Point of order, Director Dela Cruz. We had a second, but she made a quick announcement, but we did not vote on that motion.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm asking for a vote to excuse Chair Houston.
Yes, and the motion was made and was seconded. We just need to vote on that motion.
Okay, so I guess we'll just
Ms. Dela Cruz, you can just vote by a show of hands, or you don't have to go through a roll call for that.
thank you. Show of hands. This is to vote to excuse the absence of Chair. Okay, motion passed. And now I'd like to move on to the adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Thank you. Now I'd like to ask for a motion to accept the agenda.
A motion.
I second, Janine.
Okay. Thank you, Director Beach, for the motion, and seconding from Director Brown. Can I have a show of hands to adopt the agenda? Okay, motion to adopt the agenda has passed. Are there any changes needed to the minutes? Okay, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
So okay, great. Can you please give me another chance to
Seconded.
Okay. Director Brown moved to approve the minutes and it was seconded by Director Beach. May I have a show of hands to vote for the approval of the minutes?
I approve, but just a quick moment of clarification. I actually did not make the motion.
Oh,
Unfortunately, I'm not too sure who did. I just want to make sure we're being accurate.
I believe it was Director Harrington did that.
Yes.
sorry.
No problem. I just want to make sure we're being accurate.
Okay. Should I redo that then?
No, I just asked for the minutes to reflect those. Motion was made by Director Harrington and seconded by Director Beach.
Okay.
Noted, thank you.
Thank you so much. And now on to the public announcements and communications. Are there any announcements or communications?
So I think I sent you all, and forgive me if I didn't, I sent the schedule for the trainings, the civil rights training, fair housing trainings. There are 2 next week. If I didn't, there's so much going on, but I'm trying to keep you updated. And I believe I also sent you an invitation to the all-pack meeting, which is next week. So those are the huge things. As far as another announcement is with the independent review, the KDPS independent review from the ORI group. Next week, they will be talking to advocacy groups, neighborhood associations. And on Friday, really important, they want to talk to the young people that participated in the protests. And I'm having a hard time finding them because they're young people. And so it's on our website. So if you could share that site, I've shared it with some of the youth organizations I know, with the school district. But if you go to our webpage, the city's webpage, there is a link with the information. That's Friday from 5 to 6:30. And so if you could put the word out so we can make sure we get those youth voices. That's all.
Real quick about that, question about the announcement, the public announcement that you just mentioned. Is it for the protests that happen
the May-June protests?
Oh, the May and June protest? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And so if anybody has questions or something, or if young people are concerned, they will have to identify themselves unless somebody calls for them. But the report itself is anonymous. All names will be excluded. It's just that the information that's needed. So no other questions. That's my report.
Thank you, Director Bonner. Now we'll move on to the old business. I'm wondering if there's a report on the board involvement investigations for the Grand Rapids process, if we could hear more about that.
I can share. Both Attorney Robinson and I have done some research, but I actually finally got in touch with my counterpart in Grand Rapids today. And I'm going to read you what she said, how they handled it. And she said, our Community Relations Commission, which is the same as our board, does not get involved in the investigation process. We have a team of 3 city staffers who review and investigate the complaints. And those are the person in my position there, one of the assistant attorneys, city attorneys, and the director of Office of Oversight and Accountability. The commission, which is basically what you are, receives information on the reports, including how many were referred, how many were dismissed, and how many were investigated. But because they are a volunteer agency, they do not do the investigations or make the determinations on the outcomes. Okay, so they are more for information. They get the information.
Ms. Dorla, thank you for that. You've talked a lot about what they don't do. Just for my edification, can you talk about some of the things that they do complete some of their assigned tasks?
This is all I have. She didn't give me all of that. I can bring that to you. I was
just curious if their bylaws were similar to ours.
I didn't look up their bylaws because, and Attorney Robinson, we both looked at their information up. I got some conflicting information just by what's on their website. And that's why I just went to her directly. So and this is what she said, that they, all she has here is that they receive information. I do know one other thing that I'm pretty sure they do is that they make sure people know how to complain, that part. But other than the other tidbits, Attorney Robinson, if you know more about what they actually do.
No, well, I can outline their ordinances in which our ordinances was, I don't want to say based on, but we drew heavily from the Grand Rapids ordinance because that was a model that was recommended to us. And I can say that, and I went through their code of ordinances with using keywords, trying to find out what have they done. And they got started way back in 2015 with the creation of what they call the Community Relations Commission. And they also adopted an ordinance addressing discrimination in housing transactions. Now, at that point, it was a 9-member commission, and they were at that point granted power to investigate. However, either on their own or if it was referred to them by the city manager in regard to complaints of discrimination or prejudice. However, in 2019, they adopted new ordinances. They expanded the membership of their community relations board to 13 members. They created the position of the Office of Inclusion or Diversity and Inclusion, what they call the ODI, and they also tasked with the function of investigating complaints with the ODI office and the city attorney's office. So, and that model we tried to follow in our ordinance. Now there are some other things, and I think if you look at the Grand Rapids ordinance and look at our ordinance in terms of the other duties of the board, again, it's outreach into the community, informing people of how to file a complaint, and in general, kind of giving a kind of an overview or in terms of seeing that the process works well, being reported to as to how the process is working, and if there are suggestions to be made, they can play that role. So they don't have an investigatory role, but they do have more of an oversight role.
Thank you, Attorney Robinson. It seems like to me, just in listening to you speak, that one profound difference between their commission, I think they're called, and our board is that their ODI, or the person who sits in that Office of Diversity and Inclusion, is one of the investigators, whereas in Kalamazoo, Ms. Dorla does not serve as an investigator. It's 3 members of the city staff outside of her office. Is that fair to say?
At this point, it is our intention to become trained. Right now, I'm not trained to do investigations, which is why I'm not on that list. So at this point, with our current staffing, it is the city attorney's office.
But I would want, as part of that, if when we get a complaint to investigate, even though it will fall upon my office, I want to have Ms. Bonner or an employee from her department involved, and at least initially, to kind of see what's going on, how we're going about it, get some input. Even if they're not actively engaged in the investigation, I want to have them involved in the process.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a very wise and prudent decision, because as Ms. Bonner is our liaison, and there are a lot of board members last month who took issue with us not being involved in the investigation, perhaps that's a healthy compromise.
Well, I don't know as so much as a compromise. Even with that, I would insist that somebody from her office initially, get some training and they can become an active investigator. But even short of that, I want to have her office involved. I think that's critically important.
I agree. Thank you for that.
Yep, that is our expectation. We just had not been trained, so I was trying to phrase it in the realities of where I am.
Right, understandable. Thank you both.
Right.
Director Bonner, there was your counterpart in Grand Rapids, a city attorney. Who was the third position on that panel?
It is Patty Caudill. She is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I think that's her Diversity and Inclusion Manager.
No, but what was the
assistant attorneys, and then the Director of the Office of Oversight and Accountability. I think that's the newer positions that they created. And
is that something that the city of Kalamazoo has on staff, or?
We do not have that position.
I really like that their model, that none of their public safety or is involved in the process, and the idea of it being a panel of investigations, personally, I don't think this board should be involved in the investigation, but the idea of a established panel of diverse city staff in different areas, I really like that model personally. And I would like to see us maybe mirror something with identified who's in those roles.
Or at least having somebody on the panel who, because what it sounds like is that they have somebody on the panel that is at least versed or educated in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think that's important, you know, that they, at least that's part of the, because it kind of sounds like right now that we're heavily depending on the attorney's office, and I appreciate what you mentioned, that, you know, this is something that is in development. So I get that. But I think where we were kind of concerned as a board in the first place, and why this request even went out, is because it just sounded like it was heavily in just the attorney's office and with public safety. And I think that that's where the uncomfortable and concern issues came in. And so you know, if we're developing in that way with someone from Director Bonner or someone from Director Bonner's office to be part of that panel, you know, part of that investigation, or however we call it, then making sure that they have that background, because then I think that I don't want to say it changes the narrative, but I think it adds some clarity to that narrative, so that when it comes back to us and we have to hear these things and, you know, make recommendations or suggestions on these things, that we're coming from a more holistic view than something that sounds one way or another. If that makes sense.
I understand. It makes sense to me. And so, like Attorney Robinson said, we will do this together. We're going to do this together, and we're going to grow it and learn together.
So I have a few comments, and would really, I think our board would benefit from speaking to somebody on the Grand Rapids board about why it changed, their body of work changed from being an investigative body to now serving the role they did. In addition to somebody on staff, I also think that although a portion of our discrimination ordinance, or perhaps this board, was modeled after Grand Rapids, or we took some of the idea for the creation of the Civil Rights Board, fundamentally calling something a community relations board versus a civil rights board just strikes me as fundamentally different. And I think a purpose of a community relations board serving that function of community education and outreach is necessary. But when we think about ensuring the enjoyment of civil rights of every community member, and that being part of the task and implementation of this amendment to Chapter 18, I mean, I think just the name of the boards, right, kind of say it all. And so I would just encourage us to continue having this conversation. I also don't necessarily think we need to be part of the investigative process, but would return to this idea of timing of when complaints are brought to us. And if part of our task is to continue or to make these recommendations to the city manager of what we believe is discriminatory or non-discriminatory, I would never feel comfortable having an investigation completely tied up and not being part of or having the opportunity at different stages of that investigation to pose questions for the parties. Because I think it's just a process question. And this isn't to say that I would lack faith in any of the investigative entities, but it would be like reading a police report and saying like, all right, well, who's guilty and who's not, right? Without any sort of back and forth in requests for additional information. So I would just encourage us to perhaps ask our the similar entity in Grand Rapids about what that looked like prior to 2019 and why that change was made, and see if there are any lessons to be learned from their deliberative process.
So Director Glenn, are you asking me to have them come to talk to you all? And I want to make sure I understand what you're requesting.
Or I think we could ask, I mean, one of us could volunteer, or one of the chairs, the vice chair or the chair could perhaps do that. Another thought I had is, would it ever be appropriate, and this is a question perhaps for this board, and Attorney Robinson and you, Director Bonner, of whether we would ever want a member of the board to serve as part of that investigative team, perhaps the chair.
Well, I would, let me back up, and I want to cover some issues. I think if you want questions as to why the city of Grand Rapids changed, I think Ms. Bonner and I can make those inquiries. I'll say this, that the Community Relations Commission was moved, and that the changes that were made to it by expanding it and giving it its task is part of a ordinance that's entitled Human Rights. So even though they says community relations, they are basically your parallel in Grand Rapids. They may call it a little bit different, but they are engaged in discrimination issues, and the part of the chapter that lists the enforcement mechanism and recognizes what we call civil rights, but they call human rights in Grand Rapids. As far as having a member of the board engaged in the investigation, we're going to be working, I think there's a couple of drawbacks to that. First off, our work is going to be probably taking place between the hours of 8 and 5 in most cases, and many of you have jobs and responsibilities. The other concern is the due process issue, that if you now have an individual who's supposed to sit on this board and maybe hear an appeal, but they were engaged in the investigation, they lose their neutrality, and that creates a problem for someone who has got a complaint and they feel that they want a hearing before this board. So it would be my recommendation that a member of the board not participate in the investigation. Obviously, when we start this, we will keep you abreast of what's going on. And certainly if there's concerns or questions, feel free to raise them. But I don't think, but getting actually involved in the investigative process is not recommended.
Director Harrington, your hand is raised.
I think taking into account this very robust conversation that we had last meeting, and it's coming up again, I think that there's a lot of really great points that are being made. My question is surrounding, and Director Glenn just kind of touched on it a little bit, but process. Is there a way for us, and forgive me if this has been asked already, I don't remember hearing this question asked at the last meeting, but is there a way that we can be involved in a collaborative way in developing what that investigative process looks like, even though we won't actively be involved in the investigation? I'm thinking something like an SOP, or a standard operating procedure or something like that, where, from point A to point Z, when there's a complaint, here are the steps. And then as a body, even though we can't be a part of the investigations, and we would have still had a hand as the Civil Rights Board of making sure that things are being asked, due diligence is being done. So I don't know if that's possible, but it's a recommendation for me, just for full transparency. I feel very uncomfortable after the fact participating in a hearing, and I don't know what the process was at all. And also, as a Civil Rights Board member, didn't have a hand in the process, like determining what the process looks like. And so I think what I'm hearing from a lot of the directors is a desire for some sort of transparency and involvement prior to it coming to us for a hearing.
Well, you only get a hearing if there's an appeal of the determination, and the determination will be shared with the board before that process. The other thing is, an investigatory process is something that myself and other members of my office do on a regular basis, because under our current process, if there is an internal complaint of discrimination within the city, the current requirement is that there's a member of my staff and a member of the HR staff who investigate these matters. I've done several. Other members of my staff have done several. So it's not as though we're coming to this issue with no experience. We know what we're doing.
Yeah, I'm not
we know how to carry out an investigation.
We don't know what the process is.
Well, that's a different matter.
We don't know what the process is.
Well, that's different from saying enlighten us and tell us how the process works, as opposed to what I perceived was the board's going to tell us how to do it. We know how to do it.
That's not what I said at all.
And quite frankly,
no.
it's a pretty straightforward process. What we do is we review the complaint. We see if there's any gaps in there that maybe some more information needs to be received from the complainant. We oftentimes would speak with the complainant first to make sure we understand exactly what the allegations are. If we need to get some details in terms of what happened when, and any witnesses that may have been privy to what occurred. So we get that full story, and we work with that individual who's making the complaint. And then armed with that information, we can, in most cases, we're going to say, okay, let's talk to the witnesses, see if their statement is being corroborated. And then we will go to the individual to whom the complaint was filed against and ask their take on it. We try to be very neutral, because we don't want to necessarily tip them off as to what we know. We want to hear from them as to what their perception of how it went down. And so we try to make sure that we are, because I'm not going to say, well, if the complainant said this and this and this, is that true? No, that's not the way we do it. What we do is we've got this issue. We understand that there was a matter, or you had an interview with a prospective tenant on this date. What happened? And we go through that and we see what they will admit to happening. And then if we get into issues where there is a conflict, then we're going to fine tune that. We're going to see where the truth and veracity lies, and we ask them for any witnesses, as well as records that they're going to have. And that's going to be really important in terms of what is their process. What can they show us that this is the way we handle things? And interestingly enough, they may have a process that will vindicate them, or they can have a process that may show that they've got defects. And then we're going to say, wait a minute, you can't ask that kind of question. This is the way and how did you handle this particular issue? Is this an outlier, or is this your way of doing business? With the idea that we're going to be looking for justice in this process.
Director Harrington, you actually stated everything I was trying to say very well, which is basically if we're supposed to do community education and outreach, vouching for the city, and that this is a fair and just process, we need to understand what that process looks like. And I think to give credibility to this board and to this ordinance, having a standard operating procedure that lays out clear as day, here is step 1, 2, 3, here's what an investigation looks like. And Attorney Robinson, this isn't us saying you don't know how to do an investigation, but us as the Civil Rights Board saying, based on our experience, right, doing the respective work all of us do, transparency, especially here, really matters. And so having those SOPs in place, us understanding where we come in, right? And I don't think any of us are trying to dictate what that investigative process looks like, but we do need to understand. And I think there needs to be an exchange of information in this way, and thought and philosophy, and saying, here's what you need in order to have a process that the community is going to trust and use. Because having the ordinance in place is maybe step 1, maybe step 0. Getting the community to trust that it's a process that works for them is going to be the real hurdle.
Director Beach, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Attorney Robinson, for kind of going over. I would like to make a request, because I do think that education is clear. So if I can make the request of maybe at our next meeting, having a minute on the space on the agenda for a full training on what that investigation process looks like. I am particularly interested in what type of questions are being asked, how they're being asked, and even if you go as far to what, if it gets to an appeal, what a sample, it doesn't have to be a sample, but what are we going to be looking at? Are we looking at are we listening to recordings? Am I getting a summary that is done by your office? And then my other request is, I am not well versed in the structure of the city, but I do like the model of Grand Rapids where there's 3 people from different offices. If Director Bonner and Attorney Robinson, if you guys can come together and come up with some recommendations of what that third entity might be in our city structure, and come to that with some recommendations, because you're going to know the city structure and who has the capacity to do it more than any of us will. If you guys could maybe come to our March meeting with that recommendation, and if we could leave space on the agenda to get a full training on that process. And then I think we can start as board members asking more poignant questions about the process, because right now I don't think we know what to ask, because you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's where a lot of, so I just think this is part of the education piece, because to echo Director Glenn, making sure our process is transparent and that our community can trust the process is key. But that is, I would like, because I think we could talk in circles about what the but so if we could leave space and let Attorney Robinson be prepared for that, like a more formal overview. Specifically, I'm really interested in how the questions are being asked. Are they asked in a are they asked in a restorative way? And then what are we going to be receiving? Am I getting a summary of what your interpretation is? Am I getting quotes? Am I getting, those are just some of the questions. But if we could leave space, that is my recommendation.
I still think we should document whatever it is.
100%.
Whatever the process is, I feel like it needs to be written down.
100.
And to that point, how would you mount an appeal, right? Like, you need to know if the steps were followed for purposes of reviewing any appeal.
Thank you. Director Bonner.
So what I will commit to us having is an outline of how it's going to work. Director Beach, I cannot say that I will have a third person listed by the next meeting, because that's a request that requires a lot. but I'm going to keep it in mind. So just so you know, I'm not going to commit to having that third person, but I do want to honor and the request, because I think it's a valid request that we have it in writing so you'll understand and we'll all understand. And I just, this is a time where we're all going to need a lot of grace and patience, because this is new for all of us, the way we're doing it. Okay, this is new for all of us. And so I think Attorney Robinson and I can get together and start from the point of application, not application, submitting a complaint, to as far as we can get to the appeal process, what it looks like. And that part that I will try to make sure that we have something for the next meeting. And it is on the agenda for tonight already. So you're right. We knew it was coming up.
Director Graham-Williams.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your input. I agree completely with so many of the statements that were made. And Ms. Dorla just reaffirmed what it was I was just about to say. That's why it is on the agenda, because we talked so much about it last month. And one thing that I hope is that as we go through the investigative process, and it is outlined and it is on paper and it does become standardized, I think that leads to Director Glenn's point and credibility, and what Director Harrington was saying, and just how we can be open and transparent. But what I really hope, and I don't know if this is possible, that it can become a negotiation, because something that I talked about last month is, at what point do we become involved? And once the process is standardized and it's in writing, then we could possibly say, well, is there any way at this point, at point 3C, that we could ask some questions to the investigators? And I just think that the more we flush out, and if we could all become and remain really fluid and patient, again, as with Ms. Dorla said, with the process, because as it becomes standardized, then we can negotiate and determine where it is we want to ask questions, or whatever the process. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I just want to say, just speak that aspirationally, that is what I would like to see happen, as the outline comes, that we will have some ability to be involved in the process, not to adjudicate. And we get that, I get that has been stated over and over, but just ask questions that we think are pertinent.
I think this is a good segue into our next point of the agenda. Is that okay with everyone if we move on? Okay, thank you. So the next point is to talk about the investigation process packet. And I'm thinking maybe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Director Bonner, but I'm thinking maybe you'd give us an overview about the actual complaint process, like the online form. Is that what that was?
Well, no, but that was the conversation that we just had. That's what that was about.
Oh, okay.
That's what it was. So I can talk about the actual complaint application, the changes.
Is that okay?
You tell me what you want me to do, girl.
Give us an overview of the complaint.
So we did update the form, and I sent a link to the chairs to check it out. We're using the model that Grand Rapids used. It's a combination of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights and the Grand Rapids model of online reporting. I did learn shortly before this meeting that by next week, it would also be in Spanish. And so what I can do is, all these things in my head that I thought I did already, was send you all a link. But I'll send you all a link later this week, so you will see it. And it would be just a test link. I think it's a test link. I'll find out from the staff that's doing it. But we are trying to make it more user-friendly, more obvious. And we're working on a diversity, equity, inclusion site where everything would be in one place, so it'll be easier identifiable. So we are evolving. We're evolving. But I will get that link to you this week so you can see it and test it out.
Great, thank you. And so far from what I've seen, it's very user-friendly, so I think it's gonna be really great. And I'm happy to hear that it's in Spanish. Does anyone have any questions about that or comments?
I just want to thank you for your hard work on that, Ms. Dorla. And my question is, it's not necessarily to be answered tonight, but just put it out there that we know that people who struggle with discrimination are marginalized and disenfranchised, very often undocumented, but we know that in this community that there are more non-English speaking people than just those whose first language is Spanish. And so I'm just curious what happens to those who speak Arabic, or I don't even want to go through the list of that I've dealt with in my process, my practice, excuse me. But just down the road, as we start to fully engage, Spanish is wonderful, and that is a great start. But are there any plans for those who don't speak English or Spanish? And again, not for you to answer necessarily today that you have a plan, but just to put it out there.
Thank you. It's all in our heads. We just got to figure out how to make it work. You know, it's just, we know for inclusion efforts that everybody needs access. And so easier said than done. No, it just takes, I know, and I will say, if you have some contacts and collaborations of other languages that we can include in this conversation that can give us some tips on how to do it and how to be more accessible. I know we do have it, if they call the 311, is it 311, that staff can actually in there for them.
So that was my question.
That's one thing. We do have it where a person, we already have a complaint process. And so that is part of the process that the 311 staff enters the complaint if they're not able to. So we have that. But it doesn't help if that language is unknown to the person answering the 311 operator. So if you have folks that you can connect me with so we could try to come up with a plan, I appreciate it.
Well, do folks know if 311 or the city, do you have a contracted language line or telephonic interpretation service?
I don't know, not that I know of. I can ask.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Director Glenn. We relied on the language line extensively in healthcare.
Yeah, we do the same. I mean, we're required by the Department of Justice as a recipient of federal money. And I mean, I think when we're talking about just civil rights issues, that access question, of course, is something to come back to. And then you answered my question too, Director Bonner, just if someone is unable to access the internet, et cetera, that their call goes to 311, but someone's not necessarily taking a complaint, they are filling out that online form. So using the same prompts, so it would be the standardized questions and the same format, just filled out by that person taking them. Okay.
Is it possible, I would like to see almost a standing agenda item where we could get just an update of if there were any complaints filed in that month, how many complaints are currently being investigated, just like kind of those high level monthly of here's how many complaints we received, here's how many were found not applicable, here's how many were passed to the Department of Civil Rights, here how many are currently being investigated. If that could be a standing agenda item or just kind of an update from the city, that would be really beneficial, I think.
That's the plan. Yeah.
Great, thanks everyone. If everyone feels like that conversation is closed, is it okay if we move on to the next point?
Can I just ask for purposes of clarification? So if someone had a complaint right now, what we are saying is we are updating the online form, but they should still be encouraged to call, right? 311?
There is a current online form that is accessible. We're just trying to make it better. So if a person has a complaint, they can go to the city's website and there's a report, file a report or complaint, and you go to the other button. And the other button was, we didn't want it to be other, we wanted it to be its own, which is why we're creating something new. And so there is a way to report now.
Great.
And they can still call 311 if they're not able to access.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure folks knew that they could call right now while this form is being fine-tuned
They can call or they can go online to.
or go online.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Does anyone have any more comments or questions? I guess we'll find out more. We'll have more comments soon once we look over the form. So the next point on the agenda is meeting accessibility tips. I just wanted to share quickly. Last week, I think it was, we had a meeting with the Disability Network, and it was just a quick overview about like ableism. And I just wanted to share a few quick tips for virtual meetings for everyone in this meeting here. And I think in the coming months, we'll have more time to learn all of this formally and more thoroughly. But for now, I just wanted to share some of these. And you can feel free to practice them just because, you know, we want to be as accessible as possible. So one main thing is, one main thing is if somebody is blind and they're listening to us talk, it's good to identify ourselves before we speak. And I've been trying to, you know, when someone has their hand raised, I've been trying to say their name so that that person is clearly the person who's talking. But the way that our conversations go are pretty organic and sort of like popcorn-like. So if you can remember to identify yourself before you speak, that would be really helpful. Another thing is, if at all possible, keep your video on, because some people only read lips. So like keep your video on and don't do what I'm doing right now. Like keep stuff away from your face. And then that way people will be able to read your lips if needed. And of course we understand if you have to turn your video off, there's always a need for that, you know. And then there was another one. Let me see. I forgot it, but I have it here. You all do this already, but mute your microphone when you're not talking to reduce the background noise. And then be close to the camera again, just so that your face is visible. And I think those are the main things. And of course, like I mentioned, we're gonna learn all of this more thoroughly, so we'll all be like really well versed, but those are just like the main ones for now. So I think the main thing for today is to identify yourself if you can. I think it's gonna take a little bit of practice. So that's it for that point. And then the next point on the agenda, oh, sorry, does anyone have any questions or comments?
No, I just want to say thank you for that.
Yeah, I think, you know, all of us are doing our best all the time. And we want to be as accessible and transparent to everyone as possible. So the next point is, we recently had a landlord request training on housing vouchers. They weren't clear about how those work. So I'm wondering if Director Beach could give us an overview about housing vouchers, and then if needed, maybe we can work it into the next meeting's agendas to have something more thorough. How's that?
This is Director Beach. I would be interested, because I think there's a bigger conversation, because there are housing vouchers that are provided through the state and federal government that have a variety of eligibility requirements. You have homeless choice preference vouchers, project-based vouchers, subsidized housing, and then you have rental assistance. So programs that are not a voucher, that are tenant-based, that are short-term, some are short-term, some are longer-term. That, because a voucher, when a person has a voucher, that voucher is theirs. Eventually they can go wherever they want. It allows for people to have more mobility and choice in housing, where rental assistance programs don't go with that person. I think it would be really important to provide a training on sources of income and what those different parts are. Because if you go down the rabbit hole of all of the different vouchers, it is what I do for a living, and it still confuses me. It's a confusing. So I think where we need to start is providing a training on what source of income really means. And here are the different non-traditional sources of income that are intended to be captured by these ordinances. So I think if we start larger and talking about what that means, and then as needed kind of go down to that funnel, I think that would be the approach I would recommend, because just you kind of can get into the weeds. And I think where that question comes from is, what am I allowed to do? What can I say yes to? What can I say no to? And I think that is, in my world, that is the constant question I am getting. So I have to accept everybody. I can't do this, I can't do that. So I think really providing some education and training and making on what that source of income language means, and including vouchers and versus other things, is I think where we should stop, would be my recommendation, where we start, and then go down training of more specific. And there are many, many local trainings about individual voucher programs that I would be happy, I think that we could also share and make sure that's a resource to our landlords.
Director Bonner.
I just wanted to provide a little context. I guess at the training, so we started training the landlords, and the source of income is explained in the trainings. And I actually met some landlords who had never, ever taken a voucher, ever. And so they honestly, and I think the reason they don't take vouchers is because they required it 3 times the the amount of the rent. And if you have a voucher, you can never, if you have a voucher, you can never get there. And so I don't want to say it's urgent, and I understand what you're saying, but they requested some help so they'll know how to do it, so they can take vouchers. And so the landlords need to understand, and because so many of them never take vouchers because of that 3 times. And as you study the ordinance, when it comes to voucher, they cannot do that multiplier.
Yeah.
They can't do. So that's where this is coming from, because they want to know how, I'm going to say they want to know how to do it.
So
But
I would recommend that we, Director Bonner, we reach out to Pine Grove Housing and Housing Resources, which is Mickey, and provide maybe a city, say like a training for that specific thing that I would be happy to help organize. I would be happy to help. I would be willing, this is Director Beach. I'm trying to never remember to say. I would be happy to volunteer to help organize with Director Bonner a training for landlords on vouchers. If that became from a specific request, I would be happy to, if that is something the Civil Rights Board would like us to take on, I'd be happy to lead that effort.
Director Graham-Williams.
Yes, hi, this is Director Dr. Angela Graham-Williams. Yes, I would love that, and not just for the landlords, for us as well, because sometimes there's so many acronyms and data points and processes to which the tenants must go through. And if we're going to be listening and hearing and speaking on this, I want to make sure I'm as well versed as possible. And certainly you have a lot of expertise, as does Director Bonner. So, I mean, nothing is in depth possibly, but just maybe if you would consider something for you two to think about, something just high level, broad strokes, just for us, so that if we can answer questions with authority. People stop me all the time and say, I hear that you're on this board, and they'll fire a question off at me, and I want to be able to not always say, I'm going to get back to you on that.
Director Brown.
Yes, hi, Director Brown here. I really like that idea, so I just wanted to show my support for that. I also wanted to show my support in some strengths I have in this area, as I am a learning and development professional, as well as I've worked on instructional design. So I can even take the information that you have and put it in a training module that would be easily accessible and meet the needs and the requirements that are being asked of by the board, and probably being needed for the landlords as well. So if you want another partner on it, just want to let you know I'm willing to help out.
This is Director Beach, and that sounds very exciting.
And I think not even this is Director Glenn, sorry. So not even super high level for the board, but using this platform as a community education piece, right? And talking about what is available in the community, in the city of Kalamazoo and the county of Kalamazoo, in terms of voucher and housing assistance, because I see the same questions asked all of the time, either in mutual aid groups or in in my actual practice. And so I think it would be really helpful to get something out there.
Director Bonner.
I have one more question. Um, I'm going to ask you all, can we do this on one of your meeting nights? Because meeting availability for the city is really tight. So can we take one of your future meetings and do this training? And I would also like to have a target of when we can do it, because we're asking landlords to do stuff now. Okay. And so I'm not talking like next month. I'm talking what month am I in? February, maybe April.
So, this is Director Beach. Director Bonner, is it, so in my mind, there would probably be a separate one just for landlords that would be more targeted, and then one for this board as well. Is that what you're talking about? So one targeted for landlords, maybe during business hours during the day, or just at our meeting?
It's up to, I'm following your lead. I'm just trying to make sure we have.
Because I think if we want to really get to landlords, I think providing one during the day, which I would be happy to help organize. And then one, I think giving up some time during our board meeting to do one as well, but I think it's a yes and for me.
So
This is Director Harrington, and I agree with that.
So I'm going to check with the trainings that we're doing to see which ones are best attended with the landlords. We're doing some during the day and some during the evening. I'll find out which ones were best attended. And then they'll let us know.
But yeah, I think giving a meeting up sometime in a meeting up to do a training for the board is great. And then if we could do another one, whatever is the best attended based on what we know for the landlords, just to have multiple opportunities, I think would be great.
Okay. So I will communicate. Am I hearing that Jacob is going to take the lead with the support of Janine, Ms. Brown? So I will connect with Mr. Beach with that number, which one's attended, and then you all tell me, so then I can do, my job is going to be the background, getting the time and the technology and all of that stuff. That's what I would do. And I will let you all handle the training, because that's what you all do. Isn't that wonderful?
Thank you, Director Bonner. Does anyone have any more comments or questions about this? Okay, so the next point on the agenda is a little bit related to this, just in terms of the idea of our meeting being a place for education for the public. So it's a little bit dull, but we were thinking that it would be good to go through Articles 1 and 2 of Chapter 18, the ordinance, like line by line, basically, so that anyone who is watching, those are mostly like vocabulary, so that anyone who is watching can get the benefit of us reading about them, but then also having questions if we have any for Attorney Robinson or Director Bonner. So I'm wondering if I could either share my screen or if Attorney Robinson could share his screen for Chapter Ordinance 18, Articles 1 and 2.
When it comes to sharing screens, I'm not that great at this. So I would defer to you if you've got something that would be very helpful.
Okay, I'm gonna try to share it. I don't know if I have permission, but we'll find out.
You have permission.
You do.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. Okay. Can you see it? Oops. Let's see. Sorry, 1 second. I just have to give my computer permission. All right, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, I'm gonna make it larger. All right, are you seeing just the ordinance filling up your screen? Okay, great. So I'm wondering if you all wanted to take turns reading, or did you want me to drone on? I'm not sure how to do it.
You can drone on.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So I'm just gonna start at section 1. The city of Kalamazoo ordains, let me see. Sorry, 1 second. The city of Kalamazoo ordains, it says chapter 18 of the Kalamazoo City Code is renamed non-discrimination and amended to read as follows. And then this is article 1. 18.1 policy. A, it is the intent of the city of Kalamazoo that no person be denied the equal protection of the laws, nor shall any person be denied the enjoyment of their civil rights. I'm not looking at the Zoom, so if anyone has any comments or questions, please just interrupt. B, the prohibitions against discrimination provided for in this chapter do not preempt federal or state law, but are intended to supplement existing state and federal civil rights law to prohibit discrimination in the areas of employment, public accommodations, and housing not addressed at state or federal law, especially in regards to actions taken because of an individual source of income, status as a survivor, I'll say, of domestic violence, prior arrests, or conviction record. Provided, however, this chapter shall be construed and applied in a manner consistent with First Amendment jurisprudence regarding the freedom of speech and exercise of religion. So for me, that part is summarizing that the city of Kalamazoo has these additional protected classes. And I'm wondering, what does that last part mean where it says that it shall be applied in a manner consistent with First Amendment jurisprudence regarding the freedom of speech and exercise of religion? Is that saying that there's like some exemption?
Well, this City Attorney Robinson, yes, there are some, as we get further into this, there are some protections for religious-based housing.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Director Glenn again. I just wanted, and I did this in a prior meeting, but I want to draw attention to the provision that you read where it's, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to see this without all of your lovely faces blocking some of the words. Let's see. Okay. The especially in regards to, right? Especially in regards to actions taken because of an individual source of income, status as a victim of domestic violence, prior arrest or conviction record. But those have been lifted up as specific areas where we're going to pay attention to and that are perhaps beyond the scope of discrimination provisions and statutes under state and federal law. And then at the municipal level, we're going to lift up, but not exclusively. And I think that's a point that as we go through this, just thinking about that, right? And other areas and classes of community members that are facing pretty significant discrimination in our community. And so I'm going to say again, the immigrant community, right, is not listed here. And I think as we go through this, just making sure that that especially, right, is kept in mind.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to definitions. I think this will be pretty straightforward. So it says 18.2 definitions. As used in this chapter, the following words and phrases have the following meanings: age, chronological age; arrest record, information indicating that a person has been apprehended, detained, taken into custody, held for investigation, or restrained by a law enforcement department or military authority due to an accusation or suspicion that the person committed a crime. Arrest record includes pending criminal charges where the accusation has not yet resulted in a final judgment, acquittal, conviction, plea, dismissal, or withdrawal of charges. City manager. The city manager of the city of Kalamazoo or his or her designee. Sorry. Contractor. A person who by contract furnishes services, materials, or supplies to the city. Contractor does not include persons who are merely creditors or debtors of the city, such as those holding the city's notes or bonds, or persons whose notes, bonds, or stock is held by the city. Can I get clarification on this one, Attorney Robinson? I don't think I understand it.
The reason for the second sentence basically is that individuals, because the city does issue bonds, and we want to make it clear that individuals who hold those bonds are not considered contractors.
Okay, thank you so much. So then the next definition is conviction record. Information regarding the history of criminal convictions of an individual in any jurisdiction, including time served in prison, jail, juvenile detention, probation, parole, rehabilitation or diversion programs, and placement on a sex offender registry. Discriminate. To make a decision, offer to make a decision, or refrain from making a decision based in whole or in part on an individual's actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, sex, age, height, weight, marital status, physical or mental disability, family status, sexual orientation or gender identity, educational affiliation, source of income, status as a, I'm going to say, survivor of domestic violence, governmental identification record, arrest record, and conviction record. In parentheses, it says collectively protected classes. Does anyone have any questions or comments there? Okay, I'm going to move on. It's still under discriminate. A says discrimination based on sex includes sexual harassment, which means unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct or communication of a sexual nature when 1. Submission to such conduct or communication is made a term or condition, either explicitly or implicitly, to obtain employment, public accommodations, or housing. 2. Submission to or rejection of such conduct or communication by an individual is used as a factor in decisions affecting such individuals' employment, public accommodations, or housing. 3. Such conduct or communication has the purpose or effect of substantially interfering with an individual's employment, public accommodations, or housing, or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive employment, public accommodations, or housing environment. B. Discrimination based on sex includes discrimination based on an actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity of an individual. C. Discrimination based on actual or perceived physical or mental limitation includes discrimination because of the use by an individual of adaptive devices or aids. D. Discrimination also includes the use of facially neutral policies or practices that have a disparate impact on members of a protected class. Can somebody please clarify that one for me?
Well, this one is the classic, I'm not going to lease to any felons. And the data indicates that criminal histories and use of criminal histories have a disparate impact on people of color.
Okay, thank you. E, discrimination also includes conduct directed at another based on their membership in a protected class, which creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment regarding employment, public accommodation, or housing. The next definition is educational affiliation. The fact of being enrolled or not enrolled in any educational institution. Employer. Any person employing one or more individuals engaged in a lawful business or enterprise, but does not include the employment of an individual by his or her parent, sibling, spouse, or child. Employment agency. A person who undertakes to procure employees for an employer or procures opportunities for individuals to be employed by an employer. Family status. A, an individual who is pregnant, or B, one or more individuals under the age of 18 residing with a parent or other person having custody or in the process of securing legal custody of the individual or individuals, or residing with a designee of the parent or other person having or securing custody with the written permission of the parent or other person. Gender identity. A person's actual or perceived gender, including a person's self-image, appearance, expression, or behavior, whether or not that self-image, appearance, expression, or behavior is different from that traditionally associated with the person's sex as assigned at birth as being either female or male. Governmental identification method. The legal form of identification that an individual may use, including any valid government-issued identification such as a state ID card, federal immigration documentation, municipal or county ID, or passport issued by a foreign country. Individual, a human being, as distinguished from a person, as defined here. I don't know how to say that word, sorry. Herein. Labor organization, an organization of any kind or structure in which employees participate or are members, and which exists for the purposes, in whole or part, of dealing with employers concerning the terms and conditions of employment of its participants or members, whether or not such organization is subordinate to or affiliated with a national or international labor organization. Marital status, the state of being married, single, widowed, divorced, or separated. Perceived refers to the perception of the person who acts and not to the perception of the person for or against whom the action is taken. Can somebody clarify that one for me, please?
Yes, this is, again, reflects, this is again, City Attorney Robinson. This reflects civil rights law in that if an individual is, even though you may not have any outward characteristics, but a landlord or individual makes a decision based upon what they perceive you to be, even though that may not be true, that's still discrimination. This in particular came to full flower, if you will, in the 1980s and 90s, when individuals were making decisions on whether an individual was perceived as being disabled or if they particularly had HIV or AIDS, and made decisions based on that, even though the individual did not have HIV or AIDS or did not have a disability, or the disability was, they could easily accommodate. And so the idea that an employer or landlord perceives you have a disability and then takes action on that basis, even though there may not be any outward manifestation of such.
Thank you, Attorney Robinson. Person, an individual, association, partnership, agency, organization, or corporation, public or private, including the employees, members, and officers thereof. So I'm just going to reread individual so people aren't confused. Individual is a human being as distinguished from a person, which I just defined. Disability, a determinable physical or mental characteristic resulting from disease, injury, congenital condition of birth, or functional disorder, and is unrelated to one's ability to safely perform the work involved in jobs or positions available to such person for hire or promotion, or unrelated to one's ability to acquire, rent, and maintain property, or unrelated to one's ability to utilize and benefit from the goods, services, activities, privileges, and accommodations of a place of public accommodation. Disability does not include any condition caused by the current illegal use of a controlled substance, the use of alcohol, liquor, or use of marijuana by an individual. place of public accommodation. An educational, governmental, health, entertainment, cultural, recreational, refreshment, transportation, financial institution, business, or facility of any kind, whose goods, services, facilities, privileges, and advantages or accommodations are extended, offered, sold, or otherwise made available to the public. Religious organization. An organization, church, group, or body of communicants that is organized not for pecuniary profit, that regularly gathers for worship and religious purposes, and also includes a religious-based private school that is not organized for pecuniary profit. Retaliation. An adverse action taken against an individual who files or participates in a complaint investigation under this chapter. Sexual orientation. Male or female homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality, or asexuality, whether by orientation or practice. Sexual orientation does not include the physical or sexual attraction to a minor by an adult. Okay, I'm going to move on to Article 2 unless someone has a comment or question about Article 1. Okay. 18-3, discriminatory public accommodation practices. A, except as otherwise provided in this chapter, no person shall discriminate in making available full and equal access to all goods, services, activities, privileges, and accommodations of any place of accommodation. B, public accommodations must be made accessible to individuals with disabilities in compliance with state and federal law and regulations. C, nothing in this chapter permits or requires access to any place of public accommodation for the purpose or intent of engaging in criminal conduct, offensive or disorderly conduct, or conduct which represents a threat to the public health, safety, or welfare. D, nothing in this chapter requires the construction or provision of unisex, single-user restrooms, changing rooms, locker rooms, or shower facilities. 18-4, discriminatory employment practices. Except as otherwise provided in this chapter, A, no employer shall discriminate in the employment, compensation, work classifications, conditions or terms, promotion or demotion, or termination of employment of any person. B, no labor organization shall discriminate in limiting membership, conditions of membership, or termination of membership of any person in any labor union or apprenticeship program. C, no employment agency shall discriminate in the procurement or recruitment of any person for possible employment with an employer. 18-5, non-discrimination by city contractors. A, all contractors proposing to do business with the City of Kalamazoo shall satisfy the non-discrimination administrative policy adopted by the city manager in accordance with the guidelines of this section. B, a contractor shall, as a condition of being deemed a responsible bidder at the time of its submission to the city in responding to an invitation for bids or requests for proposals, certify in writing that it complies with the provisions of this chapter.
Attorney, Chairperson De La Cruz, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Could we, this is Director Beach, could we get because when we say the non-description administrative policy, Director Bonner, is that something that you or Attorney Robinson think that you could send out just so we could also reference of what that is?
Um,
18-5A.
I'm sorry, I was muted.
Uh,
Go ahead, Clyde.
We can provide that to you. I can tell you that the city's non-discrimination policy is included in all of our contracts that the City of Kalamazoo issues through its purchasing department. But when we go out for bids, now those are for the big ones. I mean, sometimes when we get smaller bids, while we make sure that who we're engaged with do follow non-discriminatory practices, if we're purchasing something, a small item on a purchase order, obviously we wouldn't have all that paperwork, but when we're looking at a big project where we're going outside for bids, the city's non-discrimination policy is part of the bid package that the contractor agrees to. But
Yeah,
we can provide that to you.
Thank you so much, Attorney Robinson.
Thank you.
And not to get us off track too much, but in terms of compliance with that after signature, has the city ever ended a contract based on allegations of discrimination by employees or consumers?
That would be something that the purchasing department would have information on.
Thanks, Attorney Robinson. C is all city contracts shall provide that breach of the obligation not to discriminate is a material breach of the contract. The contractor shall be liable for any costs or expenses incurred by the city in obtaining from other sources the work and services to be rendered or performed, or the goods or properties to be furnished or delivered to the city under contract. 18-6, discriminatory effects. No person shall adopt, enforce, or employ any policy, practice, or requirement which has the effect of creating unequal opportunities according to actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, sex, age, height, weight, family status, marital status, physical or mental disability, educational association, source of income, status as a survivor of domestic violence, governmental identification method, arrest record or conviction history for a person to obtain employment, public accommodation or housing, except for a bona fide business necessity. Such a bona fide business necessity does not arise due to a mere inconvenience or because of suspected or actual objection to such a person by neighbors, customers, or other persons, but shall require a demonstration that the policy or requirement is reasonably necessary to the normal operation of the person's business. Can we have an example of that? Like what a bona fide business necessity would be?
I'd have to do a little bit of research into that. That is an area usually that you see oftentimes in employment discrimination. And basically there has to, it's a question of, well, I'm trying to think where that would play a role. Oftentimes, well, like for instance, a lifting requirement.
Okay.
Or the ability to be able to work outdoors in a you know, for instance, it's kind of if I want to be a lumberjack but I'm confined to a wheelchair, really can't accommodate that very well. I mean, that's an extreme example, but it's something like so that you are basically are using this type of thing. And the other thing for a bona fide business necessity, where in regard to criminal histories, there are federal restrictions on lending and banking institutions, and as well as some of the federal anti-terrorism laws that you can point to and say, I'd like to hire you, but you've got this conviction record and you are prevented from me hiring you because I'm precluded by federal law.
Okay, good to know. Thanks, Attorney Robinson. 18-7, other prohibited practices. A, no person shall adopt, enforce, or employ any policy or requirement, or publish, post, or broadcast any advertisement, sign, or notice which discriminates or indicates discrimination in providing employment, public accommodations, or housing. B, no person shall discriminate in the publication or distribution of advertising material, information, or solicitation regarding housing, employment, or public accommodations. C, no agent, broker, labor organization, employment agency, or any other intermediary shall discriminate in making referrals, listing, or providing information with regard to employment, public accommodations, or housing. A report of the conviction of any such person for a violation of this chapter shall be made to the applicable licensing or regulatory agency for such person or business. No person shall coerce, threaten, or retaliate against a person for making a complaint or assisting in the investigation regarding a violation or alleged violation of this chapter, nor require, request, conspire with, assist, or coerce another person to retaliate against a person for making a complaint or assisting in an investigation. E. No person shall conspire with, assist, coerce, or request another person to discriminate in any manner prohibited by this chapter. F. No person shall use any arrest record history information other than convictions contained in a criminal record. 18-8, exceptions. Notwithstanding anything contained in this chapter, the following practices shall not be violations of this chapter. A. To engage in a bona fide effort to establish an affirmative action program to improve opportunities in employment for minorities and women consistent with applicable state and federal law. B. To discriminate based on a person's age when such discrimination is mandated by state, federal, or local law. C. To refuse to enter into contract with an unemancipated minor. D. To refuse to admit to a place of public accommodation serving alcoholic beverages a person under the legal age for purchasing alcoholic beverages. E. To refuse to admit persons under 18 years of age to a business providing entertainment or selling literature which the operator of said business deems unsuitable for minors. F. For an educational institution to limit the use of its facilities to those affiliated with such institution. Oh, actually, I have a question about F. Would an educational institution, would that be public and private? If we can limit the use of the facilities, even if it's a public educational institution?
Yes.
Thank you. G, for a religious organization to restrict employment opportunities for officers, religious instructors, and clergy to individuals of that denomination. It is also permissible for a religious organization to restrict employment opportunities, educational facilities, and dormitories that are operated as a direct part of its religious activities to persons who are members of the denomination involved or who agree to conform to the moral tenets of that religious organization. H, to provide discounts on products or service to students or on the basis of age. I, for a governmental institution to restrict any of its facilities or to restrict employment opportunities based on duly adopted institutional policies that conform to federal and state laws and regulations. J, to restrict participation in an instructional program, athletic event, or an athletic team on the basis of age, sex, height, or weight consistent with applicable state or federal laws and regulations. K, to restrict membership in a private club that is not open to the public except to the extent that private clubs which permit members to invite guests on the premises are not exempted as it concerns a member's guest. L, to the use of marital status or family status limitations in a health or pension plan if such limitations conform to federal and state laws and regulations. M, to discriminate in the provision of housing when based on a person's conviction history, when such discrimination is mandated by state or federal law. Okay, those are Articles 1 and 2. Does anyone have any more questions or comments?
I do.
Right.
Sorry. This is Director Bonner. This is to you, Director Glenn. I'm going to check with purchasing on that question. I was writing and it wasn't fast enough, but I'll ask purchasing about their compliance process in their contracts.
Thanks, Director Bonner. Dr. Graham-Williams, or Director Graham-Williams.
I was curious about K, Attorney Robinson, if you could talk a little bit about that.
This is reflective of state law that you can have a private club as long as it's not open to the public. So if you want to get a group of people together and you're not, but that if you permit members to invite guests, then you're not exempted because you can't discriminate on that basis. It's kind of quirky, but it has to do with primarily with, like I said, a provision in state law and the ability for private clubs to have a liquor license.
Okay, thank you. It just seems cumbersome to me. I grew up in Alabama where restricted clubs were the norm back in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up. And to me, just the wording it's just not as clear on what that means, but I understand the point as you clarify. Thank you.
Does anyone have any more questions or comments about Articles 1 and 2?
This is Director Brown. I don't really have any questions, but the comment is this was very enriching. Although I did read through the ordinance, there were things that as you were reading, sometimes it's just getting it in another fashion really allowed me to kind of see some things. And I actually also want to tell you that I appreciate you reading this and asking the questions, because then when you read it, then I had the same questions you had. So I just wanted to thank you, Director Dela Cruz, for asking those questions. And thank you, Attorney Robinson, for being so clear and clarifying those things. So this was very well worth our time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's good to hear. I'm hoping that people watching the meeting are also getting something out of it, and hopefully we're answering their questions too. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and then hopefully it doesn't. Okay, that was easy. All right. Sorry, 1 second. If it's all right with everyone, I'm going to move on to.
Do we want to, this is Director Beach, do we want to set a schedule? Are we planning to do just 2 sections, a meeting?
Oh, sorry, yes. I don't know if it was 2 sections. I was just going to look through this ordinance and 18A and then split them into what seemed like reasonable chunks. So I don't know if those are 2 sections each time. We were aiming for 4 meetings total, like reviewing this over the next 4 meetings. So what does everyone think about that?
Director Harrington, I mean, I'm totally fine with that, especially if we feel like it's beneficial, not only for the board, but also for the public.
And this is Director Brown, and I agree and concur with Director Harrington on that statement.
Director Beach, I think 4 meetings sounds like a good time frame to try to chunk it out.
This is Director Dela Cruz. I just realized I haven't been identifying myself. So I'll go ahead and break it into 3 more pieces, this and then 18A, and then that's just how we'll go, and then we'll fit it into the meeting if we can, and then add everything else around it. So hopefully it goes smoothly each time. So I'll keep that in mind. Do we need to vote for that, or is that just, okay, thanks. So now I'm gonna go on to citizen comments, if everyone is all right.
I have one more thought too, as we're going through the ordinance, is posing, and that exchange, your questioning of Attorney Robinson for clarification was really well done. And so I just really want to thank you, Vice Chair. And I think that at your suggestion in bringing this forward, this is a really good place for us to start. I would also like us to think through, as we talk about each of the specific areas, perhaps posing some hypotheticals for the community of like, and here's how it looks, right? Because it is easy to say, and Director Dr. Graham Williams about the private clubs, right? So we are saying you don't discriminate based on domestic violence, but what does that look like in the community, right? Because someone may not know, like, is this discriminatory? Is this fact pattern something that is tantamount to discrimination worth filing a complaint for? And so perhaps with that in mind, us all kind of thinking through that for our next meeting as we go through the language. But thank you.
Thanks, that's a good suggestion. Does anyone have any more questions or comments? Okay, so at this point, I'm gonna move to, or not move, sorry, that's the wrong word. I'm gonna ask IT if there are any citizens' comments.
Actually, we have three. One moment, let me get this started.
Hi, my name is Evangelina Alvarez, and I am a member of the Latinx community in Kalamazoo. And I am calling and looking forward to protecting undocumented individuals in our community by ensuring that they are included, that their legal status is included as a protected class. Thank you so much for your consideration and for acknowledging their protections and needs as well.
My name is Juliana Hafner, and I am a member of the Latinx community here in Kalamazoo. And I'm looking forward to protecting undocumented people by including legal status as a protected class. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elena Mireles Hill. I do not live in the city of Kalamazoo, but I have long time worked in the city of Kalamazoo with the Kalamazoo Community Foundation. I'm a member of the local Latinx community, and I am calling to urge the Civil Rights Board to be committed to protecting the rights of our undocumented residents. We know this population is too often in the shadows in our community and facing many barriers to resources and protections. And so I urge you all to include legal status as a protected class, so this board can truly be advancing and advocating protections for one of our most vulnerable populations in our community. Thank you.
And that is it at this time.
So, sorry, my computer's doing something really strange. Anyway, does anyone have any comments, miscellaneous comments?
This is Director Brown. Yes, this actually really aligns with what I believe it was you, Director Glenn, kind of brought this up at one of our very first meetings. And you, I also know that you brought this up as well, Director Dela Cruz. And so this really, for me, resonates. I really like hearing the public comments and really seeing that we are, this body seems to be in alignment with the needs and the request of the community as a civil rights board. So for me, it was very enlightening, I guess, and enriching to hear these comments. And I really hope that as a board, we do our best to consider them and to do what we can to serve our community in the way that they're asking and requesting us to do. Thank you.
This is Director Dela Cruz. It's really reassuring to hear, that a lot of people in the community are watching and paying attention, and it feels like a mandate to me. And obviously, this is my whole background, so I'm like never going to stop thinking about it. So I'm glad that there's support and passion, and I look forward to having more conversations about this and how it would look in the future. So thank you, the public, for your comments. All right. Does anyone else have any more miscellaneous comments?
Along with, I'm sorry, this is Director Glenn, along with the thought of having some hypotheticals around what discrimination is looking like for the various protected areas that we've addressed. And with this mandate, as you said, Vice Chair, in lifting up the discrimination based on immigration status, I think it would be helpful to have organizations or somebody to even speak to these particular areas, right? And I wonder if it would be helpful to have some folks come in and obviously, so I represent survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, including on housing discrimination issues. And so I could certainly give you hypotheticals and ideas of what this has looked like. But I wonder about having people who can speak about arrest and conviction history, about discrimination based on immigration legal status, because we have experts in our community who could come to us and say, here is what we're seeing. So is that something we want to embed in the reading of the ordinance?
To clarify, when you say embed in the reading, would that be like we have people in the meeting with us who are representing these communities, and then while we read, then they can interject and give hypotheticals?
So if we had an idea of where we were going to be through a setting of the agenda, so if we knew we were going to talk about specific areas of the ordinance, we could say, okay, we're going to speak about conviction issues, right? Would we want someone from the public defender's office to come in and speak about what that's looked like, or legal aid society, housing unit, something along those lines?
This is Director Beach. Might I recommend, I think that's a great idea. I would maybe recommend after we finish reading the ordinances, if we could even have a panel after the ordinances and kind of have them all at one time for the community. And then so we can maybe ask more poignant questions once we have a full understanding of the ordinances and kind of go through our own learning process. A panel of people who could speak to those areas would be really, I think, beneficial.
This is Director Dela Cruz. I agree that's a great idea. So we could tentatively plan on using the next 3 meetings for the readings, and then maybe for the meeting after that. I don't know if that falls on April, so that might be the training for the vouchers. But either that month or the one after, we could talk about, or we could put this panel together.
I would recommend if we start if we can get someone who wants to volunteer and start working on, just because people get very busy and before we know it, it comes up. And so if we can start working on building that panel, I think that would be, we should start working on that sooner rather than later.
This is Director Harrington, do we need to convene maybe like a subcommittee to work on that? Maybe 2 or 3 of us?
This is Director Brown. Not a doctor yet.
Speaking into being.
Yeah, listen. I'm almost there. But no, yeah, for Director Harrington, I believe, yeah, this is something I don't think all of us need to work on. I believe we can definitely divide and conquer this. So if 3 people are willing, or 2 or 3 people are willing to pull together that panel, I personally will be quite enriched. And as I'm sure our community and whoever is listening in would be thoroughly enriched by having those examples and, real hypothetical that they can be. Because again, I don't know, it could be just because of my way of learning. Sometimes I need to see a situation, identify it as something that, maybe even something that I have experienced myself or have seen, and then go, this is what we're talking about. I think having those only helps us to deepen our understanding of the ordinances and deepen our understanding of what this stuff really is. So that when we really get into the meat and potatoes of all of this, we'll be thoroughly prepared and we'll say, yes, we remember an example like this. And we can tie those things back. And, along with, having the process involved, I mean, it just makes us a more prepared and again, talk about building that trust, right? Like you mentioned earlier, it's about building that trust, and, people are going to trust you if you know what in the world you're talking about. So I agree with that. I'm not asking to be on that because I'm working with Director Beach, so just throwing that out there.
Point of clarification, do we need to make a motion to form a subcommittee, or can we just form one?
I don't know.
Attorney Robinson?
I would say you probably need a motion to that effect. Yep.
I would like to make a motion, or I guess we need volunteers first. I don't know what comes first, the motion or the volunteers?
The motion should probably identify who you want to sit on the subcommittee.
So can we do it via nomination then? Can we nominate and then?
Well, usually if there's volunteers, that's the easiest thing to do, is Yeah, I'd like to do
Oh.
that. I'd like to do, as long as there's a sub quorum of the body, you're okay.
Mhm. Oh, okay.
This
Here,
is Director
here is
Harrington.
my, go ahead, go ahead.
No, you go.
Here is where I am with it. This isn't our first time talking about people coming in because, real life examples is something we discussed last month. It wasn't necessarily reflected in our minutes, but I remember being talking about that's the way that I learned, and I appreciate examples, and I think that's why we ended up coming down with the list. And where I am with it is I would love to help and serve. I just don't know if I'm going to have the professional contacts in every area. So I'm hesitant to volunteer. And then I also think that we're not looking at having a panel until probably early summer. So by then, I'm not sure what my schedule will look like, if it'll open up. So I just want to speak to that point, because we were talking about volunteers and we heard crickets, but the reason I think is not because we have a lack of desire, but I just need to know what it's going to look like. And I think it's so early in the process, as we still have 3 more long chunks and 3 more meetings, which is 3 months. And then the 4th month is we're discussing, I can't remember what you said, Vice Chair Dela Cruz, but something happens on that 4th month. Someone's coming in to train us, Directors Beach. And then after that, so it'll be in July, I'm assuming, if my math is correct. So certainly we can vote on it and have the motion today, or perhaps we can talk about making the motion later on in the process. But I just don't know what my life is going to look like. And I don't know if that's why so many of us were hesitant to volunteer so early in the process.
Director Bonner.
I want to make a suggestion that the chairs, we work together to get a schedule. And so then we come back next time, we can tell you when we think the meeting would be, and then you can look at your schedules and figure out who could do what. Does that make sense? Let's get a schedule because we're talking about, we have a month of training, we know that, and then we may do a training for landlords at night, depending on what they want. So we got most of the summer taken because we only meet once a month.
Right. And I agree with that, because I just wanted to speak from my point of view, is that I know I pushed last month about having real life examples, but then I didn't volunteer when there was a question. And I just wanted to explain that was my reasoning why, is because it's just so far in advance. I'm not sure what's going to happen. So thank you. I like the idea personally.
We'll bring a schedule next month for the rest, for everything that we know as of tonight. Does that work?
Yes. Director Brown, your hand's up.
Oh, no, Director Bonner took the words right out my mouth. So no, sorry, I meant to lower my hand. Thank you very much. And thank you, Director Bonner.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we'll work on a schedule. I actually have a miscellaneous question because I was a little bit confused. One reason that I didn't email out the agenda sooner was because I was told that, I think this is some confusion, but I was told that we're not supposed to email the agenda to this group, this body, more than 48 hours in advance. Is that right? Or can I email out the agenda sooner?
I think the issue last time that you guys had started discussing the agenda, and I think that's where Attorney Robinson stopped us, because we started having dialogue, which you cannot have privately. So I think that was what happened that time. And so I think we can mail it, send it what we want. We just can't collaborate and meet on it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If another question, or this is Director Dela Cruz. If somebody wanted to add to the agenda, would it be okay if they sent that to me privately? Okay.
Please do. Please do send all your agenda items to your chairs. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think there was some confusion, so I just wanted to clarify.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
So this is Director Brown. So just again, because I think I was with Director Cruz on a little bit of the confusion. And so the point is, yes, get the agenda. Yes, send your agenda items. However, no discussion about the agenda items or what's been submitted until our meeting. Correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
And Chair, it might be good if you have a deadline that you want agenda items, so you don't run into that having conversations and stuff. So you and the chair need to decide the agenda items, send out something. Like in the other committee I was in, we sent out, do you have agenda items by this date? And after that, it would be the next month, on the next month's agenda. But you and the chair and I, we can work together to get that schedule and get that piece ironed out.
Thank you. And another really quick question, sorry, Director Graham-Williams. Once we have that schedule, is that the same? I can send it out anytime? Okay, thank you. And then Director Bonner said yes, for anyone listening. Director Graham-Williams.
My question is for Attorney Robinson. Is there a reason why our agendas for Civil Rights Board are not posted to the city website and a link to our meetings, like, for instance, Foundation for Excellence? Does this fall into a different category?
No, there's no reason why they can't be.
Okay.
But it's Ms. Bonner and neither I don't do that work. So I think it's just a question of making sure whoever posts that and maintains that schedule receives the information so they can do it. That's another reason for not waiting till the last minute. And the other reason is if there is an issue that requires a little bit of research, it's always nice to get a heads up and have the luxury of being able to do that research and being able to share it with you at the meeting, as opposed to hearing about it just the afternoon before.
Exactly. Right. So perhaps that's something you can consider with President Houston. I apologize, Chair Houston, Chair and Vice Chair De La Cruz, is because for another committee that I sit on, another board, we post sometimes a month in advance. And I think that also provides a level of transparency and fodder for conversation for those individuals in the community who want to see what it is we're talking about. I definitely want to tune in this week, and I'm going to leave a citizen comment.
Thanks, Director Graham-Williams. That's definitely my instinct also. So that's why I was like, oh, I can't send anything out before 2 days in advance. So I'm glad that it's clear now.
Yeah, you certainly can. Yeah.
2 days was the minimum. That's the minimum.
Right.
But anyway, that's good. I'm glad that I know now.
So we had a public comment that came in late that IT sent me. I don't know what you all want to do with it, but I wanted to honor his. Yeah, I wanted. So IT, if you could play that for them.
All right. One moment.
Thank you, Amy.
Hello, I live within the city limits. I had a interesting question, I think. I don't know. I was applying for a job for the city, and I got an application, and I filled it out. And I got another application, not a job offer. And it was asking questions about my gender, my parents' names, different things like that. And I wasn't sure if those are things that could be left blank. And so I asked. The city manager's office said that you could leave it blank, and the city attorney's office said that you could not. And I was just wondering, and that also made me wonder, what if the city attorney's office is the group that is doing the discriminating, since they're the people that are doing the fact finding? Anyways, thank you very much.
Attorney Robinson, can we get some clarification on what might have happened here?
It would be inappropriate to discuss this matter in an open meeting. I'm aware of this individual's complaint, and it's being handled, if you will.
I would, this is Director Beach. I would like just to thank the person for their comment and just echo, I'm sure, what the commitment that we are looking to make sure that as this board, that all of our practices follow these ordinances, no matter who is hiring, who is providing the housing, who is doing any of the activities. So, and I think that's a commitment of, I will speak for myself as a chair, and I'm sure I speak for the rest of the directors on this board, that we joined this board for a reason and we have been very committed to transparency and accountability. And I hope through our conversations that is clear and will continue to be clear.
Thank you, Director Beach. Does anyone have any more miscellaneous comments? Okay, in that case, I'm going to move to adjourn this meeting.
I second that. This is Director Harrington.
Can we please have a show of hands to vote to adjourn the meeting? Thank you. Meeting is adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
You guys alone for the rest of the night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
I'm gonna read. I did as much as I could in there.